sense of humanity and moral responsibility. The Geneva Conventions provide essential legal protections for civilians, prisoners of war, and individuals in occupied territories, ensuring that their rights are upheld during armed conflicts. These international treaties safeguard the most vulnerable and establish clear responsibilities for combatants and occupying powers to ensure that there are no abuses or violations. By defining the rights of those affected by war, the Geneva Conventions reinforce the moral obligation of military forces in times of conflict. This is the forgotten frontline, civilian rights, and the legacy of the Geneva Conventions. In 1942, the war wasn't just fought by soldiers. It was fought in the homes, in the streets, in the very lives of civilians like me. We were caught between the forces of occupation, the violence of military regimes, and the crushing weight of despair. We had no one, our homes became battlefields, our families statistics, and we had no one to turn to. There was no law to protect us, only the endless ravages of war. How are we to survive this? How are we to know that something, someone, somewhere was watching out for us? In 1949, after the horrors of the Second World War, the nations of the world came together and created something extraordinary, the Geneva Conventions. They established a legal framework protecting those most vulnerable in wartime, civilians, prisoners of war, and the wounded. The convention set clear rules on how war should be fought, not just for soldiers, but for everyone. They recognized that the brutality of war should not extend to those who could not fight back. Before the Geneva Convention, civilians like you and I were often forgotten. Our lives were expendable, our rights ignored. But the Geneva Convention changed that. They established the principle that even in war, there are limits to cruelty. They defined the duties of occupying forces and fighters to guarantee the protection of civilians, respect to their homes, and preservation of their dignity. The Geneva Conventions established that civilians should never be intentionally targeted in war. Their homes, their communities, and their lives must be protected to the fullest extent possible. It defined the rights of those in occupied territories, ensuring that they weren't being exploited or abused. These protections extended to prisoners of war. Soldiers who were captured were entitled to humane treatment, adequate food, and medical care. The Geneva Conventions created clear guidelines on how prisoners should be treated, ensuring that they weren't tortured or used as human shields. For the first time, international law stood firm in saying that even in the brutality of war, there are lines that must not be crossed. Article 17 of the Geneva Convention states that a prisoner of war is bound to give only his surname, first name, date of birth, country of citizenship, army, rank, regimental, and personal or serial number, or failing this, equivalent information. If they fail to comply, they could be subjected to restricted access of what is considered basic human necessities. But even with these protections, the reality was far from perfect. Violations of the Geneva Conventions continue to occur throughout war. Civilians, like us, continue to suffer under occupation, while prisoners of war were subjected to unimaginable horrors. Yet, they remain a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the most brutal of wars, humanity must still prevail. The Geneva Conventions represent the moral obligation to protect the innocent. They remind us that war is not just a fight between soldiers. It is a struggle for humanity. It stands as a testament to the idea that even in the most devastating conflicts, we are all bound by law. And in those moments when we are most vulnerable, there are rights that still must be protected. So what does it mean to be the forgotten front line of war? It means that there are people like you and I whose rights must be safeguarded even in the darkest of times. The Geneva Conventions, they are not just a set of rules. They are a promise that no matter how brutal the war, there must always be a legal standard for protecting those most vulnerable. And it is up to all of us to uphold it.